Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of FilAm Creative's Voices. I'm your host, Walter,
and I'm Arlyn de la Pena.
And we are here with Diane Paragas. She is a filmmaker of this awesome movie called Yellow Rose, and she is joining us through video conference to talk about her film, her life experience, and just how she got to where she is. And she's video conferencing us from New York City. Yes, New York City, that other city that's not LA. Nah, I got left
the good
NYC.
Oh,
What's good? Nah.
Aid.
How are you, Diane?
I'm calling from Brooklyn.
Oh, so we have to specify that we're speaking to her from Brooklyn. Okay.
There's a difference.
Yes, there is a difference.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Welcome. I'm good. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Phil, and I'm Am, and I'm creative, so it's all kind of good.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is the first time we've ever really done a Skype conference with anyone, and so you are popping our cherry right now.
Technology.
That's right.
We're like 2 minutes in. All right.
We're going like your French girl.
We got an hour.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? Where are you from? And where you're located now?
So I am a writer and director, and I'm based out of Brooklyn, New York. Represent. And I've just been making films for a really long time. I grew up in Texas, which is kind of what I based the film Yellow Rose on, was kind of my growing up in Texas. I was into music when I was a teenager. I had a band. I even shaved my head off, and I thought I was like, oh, cool. It was like a mini mohawk going on. And we even got to record an LP, and it played on the radio. And, you know, like we did okay, but we were not good. I was just like really like aggressive, I guess, and just like wanted to. But we played gigs. And so I kind of took that experience of growing up in Texas, and later on when I became a filmmaker and I was kind of wanting to write a script, this actor friend of mine said, why don't you write about your childhood growing up in Texas? And I was like, nobody wants to hear about, you know, my childhood. But then when I thought about it, I said, what if this character loved Texas? Because I didn't love growing up there. I felt really isolated and alienated. That's why I shaved my head and I was like a goth. But what if I created this character who loved Texas and loved the thing that's like almost the most Texan thing you can think of, and that's country music. And then it began to start a story that was like an unrequited love, that, you know, you love this thing that doesn't love you back. And that was a great starting point, I thought, for a film. And that's kind of how I started writing this story. And that was a long time ago. It took me a long time to make the movie. But, you know, on my first pass, it was sort of like I did have some interest early on, but, you know, it's really hard to raise money for a film. And so I just continued to make films and to direct. And I think it was Malcolm Gladwell or someone that said you have to have like 10,000 hours of experience before you get really good at something. So I have that. So when I actually got the opportunity all these years, 15 plus years later, I have all this experience of directing. So in some ways, I think this was my time to make the film. And then to add another layer, the other part of the story is that our lead character, Rose, close to the beginning of the film, her mom gets picked up by immigration and they get separated. Mm-hmm. And she has to go on this journey to find a home and in some ways find her voice. So obviously the times that we're living in, immigration is on everybody's mind. So it turns out that it's a very timely story. And that was always in my script. It was always the mom got separated from her daughter because of immigration, which also speaks to a larger truth, which is there've always been immigration problems in this country. It is not now, it's not the first time, it's always been there. I mean, more deportations happened under Obama's administration than any other, for example. So the last time immigration reform happened was during the Clinton administration. So, you know, we have to remind ourselves about that. And then there's a sort of like, you know, because country music is a part of it, and there is this kind of resurgence of country cool, you know, like there's this kind of sort of like hipster, it's, in fact, they're called hipsters.
Oh, yeah, okay, did not know that.
Yeah, so there's this kind of like country cool happening that's going on now, that's sort of like a hearkening back to the old school country music, which is what Rose, my character, listens to in the film. So just a lot of things, like, I think it speaks to all those people out there who are creatives, you know, stick with it, like stay with that story that really means that much to you, and you know, have faith in it, because everything has its time. And, you know, in my case, I think this is the time the film should have come out. I mean, like, it's so timely. It's so needed in the world. So, yeah, so I, you know, when all those years ago when I first wrote the script, I ended up starting directing television. I worked at MTV, and then I moved to Asia, and then I directed a show for Discovery Channel. When I came back to New York, I started my own company and started doing stuff for Bravo and some other networks. Then I made my very first film for PBS called Kababayan.
Oh, yeah.
So I directed that. And then, you know, a couple years later, I was doing all this television and commercials. I directed a film called Brooklyn Boheme with Spike Lee, Chris Rock, Talib Kweli,
Nice.
Saul Williams, Rosie Perez, Vernon Reed. And it was about the Black arts movement that happened in Brooklyn. And I'm told that Spike shows this film to all his crews at the beginning of each, to prepare them for the shoot that he's doing. Someone told me that from his crew, and I was like, really? That's so cool. So it's like he shows my movie to his people. So I did that film about 6-7 years ago. And then that's when I kind of, right after I made that film is when I picked Yellow Rose up again. So it wasn't like a solid run. It was like around that time I'd written a few other scripts in the middle. And then I was like, you know what? That story was about kind of the African-American community and owning their own narrative. And I'm like, what about Filipino narrative? You know, and I kind of went back. I went back to it because of that, and for other reasons too. But it was like, I looked around and there still wasn't a lot, or if any, Filipino content out there as far as cinema goes. Filipino American content. There have been great Filipino American films, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But it's like they always have difficulty finding that audience in the mainstream. Mm-hmm. And so I got money to do a short. And so it's a good thing when you're trying to do a feature film, if you can, and you're finding trouble either raising enough money to do the feature, it's always a great thing to do a short, because it's easier to raise money for a short. It also helps you creatively to kind of find what the story is and to see if it works. And so I did that a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago. And from that, I ended up winning this grant that ABS-CBN put out called the Cinematographer Grant. And their objective was to put a Filipino film on the world stage. So myself and HP Mendoza, we were the first grantees. And we got the grant at the same time. And then HP made this amazing film called Bitter Melon. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen it, it's a great film. Yep. But I ended up having to wait a year because the woman I wanted to play the lead, Eva Noblezada, was still in Miss Saigon. And she was still finishing her run. And what's interesting about that is they were like, well, you know, the grant is to make the movie this year. If you wait, you're going to lose the grant. And I was like, okay. So I turned it down, which is crazy. Wow. But that's another thing that I was saying about keeping your convictions. And they actually ended up respecting that move and thinking like, wow, you know, it really must mean a lot. And they did let me keep the grant. And then they ended up becoming a bigger part of the film and became full producers on the film, ABS-CBN. So it worked out, and we ended up getting her, and then we shot it last year, and I just premiered it at the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival in May. So yeah,
awesome.
That's the journey.
Congratulations again on that. Well, speaking of which, you're talking about, like you were mentioning, the country music inspiration. What was did you have a specific artist that was inspired? Like, because I was sort of hearing a little Patsy Cline in there. And
oh yeah, good ear. Definitely, and she talks about it a little bit in the film. in the film, she talks about Townes Van Zandt, who is like this amazing country singer who is from Texas, and he's sort of like the Bob Dylan of country music, sort of like a poet, and this kind of larger than life character. And of course, Patsy Cline and Loretta Lynn and those sort of old school country singers. She has this sort of old soul. She listens to vinyl. You see that right away. You can even see it in the trailer. And she's just an old soul. She likes that old soul kind of music. And then she finds in the film, she ends up becoming friends with this guy who's this old style country guy, Dale Watson, who actually plays himself. That's the real Dale Watson.
Oh, wow.
Kind of he's this figure of Austin, the Austin music. And if you talk to anybody from Austin, they'll know Dale Watson. He plays like regularly there. He's like this icon of old school country music. And he plays himself in the film. We shoot in his house. We shoot at the recording studio in his complex. We shot real performances of him, and he wrote the music together with me and some of the other cast. So we wrote the songs all together. I got to use my old days of being a musician kind of again. So that was amazing for me.
What was it like for you growing up in Lubbock? Because I'm not sure how many people even know where Lubbock is located and what it's like to live in Texas and, have part of your childhood and upbringing there. And so were there a lot of Filipinos around you? Like paint the portrait for us so we can get a better idea.
I think there was one other family that was Filipino, but not in my grade, and we didn't know them well. But definitely the only Filipino in my class, always growing up, and definitely one of the few Asians in my school ever. So it was really, I just felt alienated. I just didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't feel like I belonged. I just wanted to be like a blonde cheerleader because it was a very, small town, Texas town that I grew up in. And I always dreamt of living in New York, where I live now. Like I always had these aspirations to live in the big city, and even my tastes and stuff were like, at the time I liked British New Wave, and I liked, I liked, like The Cure and, the Smiths and things like that. And I just felt like I just did not belong there. And I painted back then. I was a painter. And I played music, and I was just this really artsy, weird kid that wanted to live in the big city. So it's like, I just did not belong. And it was, I didn't get asked to my prom, which is a big deal. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And later on, I was like, I just thought I was just too weird or like hideous looking or something. But then later on, I'm like, wait a minute, maybe there was some racism going on there. Like later on, I only really understood it later, which is interesting because you don't know it when you're living it. True. You don't know. And my parents didn't really. You
were so immersed in it that you didn't.
I was so immersed in it that I didn't know of it. Exactly. And I know because my first boyfriend, maybe there's too much information, but he was like the class, like the hunk. He was the swim team and he was really smart. And as soon as we got to college, he asked me out. And I was like, what happened? Like, he's like, he actually admitted, I'm not ever going to say his name, but he was just like, to be honest with you, my parents are kind of racist, and I just don't think they would understand me. And I've always liked you. It just, until I could be away from them, could I feel comfortable. Isn't that interesting?
So how did you respond to that?
I was hurt, that was my first realization of racism. It wasn't while it was happening. I just thought I was just this weirdo. I just felt weird. I didn't know why. Then at that moment, it was the first year. It was my freshman year. And then when we went back home, because we both went to college at UT, and then we went back for the summer, and I would like sneak around with him to avoid the parents. Like we would meet at like 7-Eleven and stuff. And I'm just like, and my parents were doctors. Like they were, like upstanding members. Yeah. And his family was like lower income. So, but I was hiding from his family.
Wow, that's surreal.
So that was just my first realization of racism. I think that probably was when it really hit me like, wow, you know.
And were you guys like this? He told you right when he asked you out, or this was like 1 year into or 6 months into the relationship kind of thing?
Early on. It wasn't a long relationship, but like early on, he kind of told me. He explained it to me, and he was embarrassed about it. To be fair, he's a lovely guy. He's a great guy, but you know, he thought it was bad. You know, he's like, I am apologizing for them. They're just like rural country bumpkins that, you know, they would just find it weird. They wouldn't understand it.
What was your transition like from graduating at UT in Austin and then heading to New York?
I just could not wait to get to New York. So I did during like the summer, and it was super easy. I just always wanted to live here, and I think I just blossomed as soon as I got to New York. It was just like my town, and it's like I'm such a New York girl, and always have been, and still am. I just love everything about the city, and I'm, you know, just all of those feelings of feeling weird. I met all these people that were just like me, and very quickly I found people. There were like-minded people that ended up moving to New York as well.
How did you connect with the actors from Yellow Rose? How did you reach out to them? I mean, because you have some big names, you know, and I can only imagine like what that's like.
Yeah, so I have a funny story about that. So my very first directing, producing job, where I was actually, you know, like director, producer, I was in my 20s, and I was in the Philippines, and I had suggested to the executive producer that, hey, can we get Lea Salonga to do the hosting bits? And they're like, oh, and I said, I think I know someone that we could get to her, and then we got to her. So actually, the first thing I directed was Lea Salonga when I was in my 20s, and she was
nice.
And then I was like, you know, I never saw her again. And then all these years later, when we got the funding to do Yellow Rose, I sent the script to her agent through contact, and she read the script and agreed to meet. But as soon as we saw each other, she's like, oh my God, you know, you're the one that directed. I said, yeah. She's like, I didn't know that was you. And then she said yes, like right then and there when I met up with her. And she had already decided to do it. She liked the script a lot. I think it helped too because I'd already cast Eva Noblezada, so that she knew her because they were both Miss Saigon. And for Eva, I just, you know, same thing. I actually cold sent her agent the script, and he really liked it. And then I went to see her in Miss Saigon and was blown away. I mean, just like, wow, this girl is amazing. And I had dinner with her that night, and I offered her the part that night, and she said yes.
Damn,
that was it.
So cool.
Yeah, I think, you know, as great as she is, there's not a lot of parts that are a Filipino lead in a title character in a film. I mean, for LA Asian Pacific Film Festival, I was the first Filipino female director ever to open the festival in 37 years.
Wow.
The second Filipino film was 18 years ago that the debut opened the film festival, but that was 18 years ago.
It's crazy. I can't believe that was 18 years ago.
And this is an Asian American film festival. So it's like, so you can imagine for Eva and for Lea, you know, this was a unique project.
It's an opportunity. It's something they get their teeth in. Yeah. And I mean, we were talking about that earlier. Like that's why, like FilAm Creative Voices is important, because now, you know, people get to see the face of the director. They get to see you. You know, who would have known that there was a Filipino American woman who was doing these, you know, films and projects for Spike Lee and doing all these wonderful things, but because they'll just assume, oh, it's probably like a male or a black male or a black female, but like it's actually a Filipino American woman.
Yeah, and I will say I co-directed that film with my great friend Nelson George, and it was based on his memoir. He was the first investor in Do the Right Thing, and you know, like he's this icon of African American culture. And when we did the film together, we formed a company, and it's called Blackapino.
Nice.
So when you watch Boheme at the very, it's like Blackapino Productions presents. So if you know enough, you can figure out a Filipino was in this. But he came to the LA Asian Pacific to our world premiere, and you know, I can't say enough about Nelson, you know, because I think everybody needs a mentor or somebody who kind of helps raise you up. And he had just done a movie called Life Support. It was his first film directing debut, and it starred Queen Latifah, and she went on to win the Golden Globe for it. And then his follow-up, he co-directed. He asked me to co-direct with him, which is amazing because I hadn't done a feature-length documentary at that point. And for him to share the title and to give me all of that was kind of what got me started on the sort of feature film route, which is amazing.
Yeah. And that's wonderful of him to be able to to take you under his wing and and he didn't have to, but he did. And that's very generous. So shout out, that's awesome. And I think that's what we need.
Knows and African American culture that just kind of makes sense. Like I felt very comfortable understanding that world, and yet I brought an kind of outside perspective a little bit at the same time. But it's like we opened the Urban World Festival with that film, so it was similar. It's interesting because I remember we opened the film Urban World Festival, and then Yellow Rose we opened the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival. So it was very similar in sort of its trajectory.
What was it like for you to be there in the theater at LA Asian and opening film? My goodness, what did you feel from the audience, and how did you feel like everything was being taken?
Well, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and she came on stage with me. She's in the movie. She plays Leia's daughter in the film. And Francis Collado, who's the executive director, he wanted to bring his daughter up because the film is a kind of a mother-daughter story. And he suggested for both of us to bring our kids up, which I thought was so awesome. And so I brought her out, and I just thought it was such a great thing that he had come up with, because other than having her as my daughter, that was probably one of the best days of my life. It's this film that took me so long to make, and then that I could share it with my little daughter, and then my mom was in the audience. I was like, I got so choked up. But I think the biggest moment was, so after that moment, I went off stage and I was like, I was just terrified. Like, I don't know, a lot of filmmakers can't watch. So I tried to watch, and then I just couldn't. Like, I went to the back of the theater and I was like, I can't watch this thing. It's like, that woman hates it. I just started seeing people hating it. And so I went into the back of the stage, and I was just curled in a ball. I hope people like this film. I'm like, it sucks. Just all your insecurities happen when you make something that's so personal. It's like your baby. It really is. And so it just means so much to me. And I knew that it was a lot of the Filipino Hollywood royalty was there. And it just meant a lot for me that people like it, And so I was so nervous. I couldn't watch. I was just sort of sitting in the back. Then the credits roll and the film finishes, and I walk out on stage, and I got this standing ovation. It lasted a while, and I was like, what? It was crazy. And I was so overwhelmed. And then from that point on, it's just been unbelievable. I don't know if you know this, so we won the grand jury prize. And then I played at Gina Davis's film festival, which is a bigger festival. And it was kind of all these films that were award winners already. We had the South by Southwest Audience Award winner was in competition. The Tribeca Audience Award winner was in competition. Just a bunch of really great films. And we won the grand jury prize there, which was amazing. Okay. And then I went to CamFest in San Francisco. Yeah, and so we won the grand jury prize at CamFest. And so we won every festival we played, which is unbelievable. And I think at the end of every screening, without fail, people kind of come up to me in tears. And for different reasons. Some people love the music. Some people are undocumented themselves. A lot of young people have come up to me after screenings to tell me that they're undocumented. And it was really important for them to say it out loud and to feel proud and own it. Mm-hmm. But the film gave them the courage to do that. That's happened to me maybe half a dozen times already, and only had 13 and then sort of, African American people, white people, young, old, kind of just responding to the story of how sad that this is going on in the world, and that they could really feel what it would be like to be somebody who's separated from your family because of immigration.
What did your mom think, and how did your daughter react to all of it?
My mom, I think my mom was the first person to stand up. My mom standing up first. So she loved it, but it's so Filipino. I was like, all right. She loved it. And she's a brilliant woman. She's a writer too. She's a doctor, but she also writes poetry. So she's sort of an artist as well. And she really loved it. She was like so proud. And I had a lot of my titos and titas and a lot of, the West Coast family coming out and supporting. And my daughter was just, she's 4. She thinks it's normal now. She went back to school telling everyone she's an actress, and she just did the I was like, oh, deal now. Yeah, she's like a big deal now. She's like Leia's mom. She said Leia's her fake mom. So
did she see it got to her head, or did she freak out when she saw herself?
No, I had her in the back because she wouldn't be able to sit through. She was backstage with me for a little bit, and then she went and played with Princess Punsalam's daughter in the back room. So the two of them were playing together. It was cute.
Going back to your I just want to talk real quick about your parents too. How were they? Yeah. How did they support you, with your creative endeavors, when you were in high school and then going into university and onward?
I gotta say, I have the Filipino unicorn parents that supported me as an artist. When I was painting, they bought me an easel. When I showed interest in music, they put a piano in my bedroom. They drove me to my gigs when I had the shaved head and the bad band. They drove me to my gigs. I think because they're both kind of artists in their way, they value art, and they kind of taught my brothers and I that early on. We would go to museums together and see plays together, and art was something that was very important in our lives, and we talked about it a lot growing up. So I had really encouraging parents, which is so unusual, obviously. And I think I'm who I am today because they supported me all that time, all the way through every endeavor that I wanted to do as a creative person. They supported me.
That's awesome.
I know.
I feel there's a trend because half of our guests, I feel they really had a lot of support from their families, so they're super uber, successful. And then we'll have, the other end of the spectrum where, they didn't have support and they had
to fight for it.
Yeah, exactly. They had to fight their own family to, reach for their dreams. And I feel it's a direct correlation. I mean, with anything, not just with, art or entertainment, but if you have a supportive family base or supportive friends or just a supportive tribe, it helps exponentially along the way.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. And I think, my other film, Brooklyn Boheme, it was about that. It was about how community helps you do better work. Having a group of peers that supports you and elevates you and makes you do better. I remember Chris Rock was like, when I'm looking at Spike Lee doing all these amazing films, I better up my stand-up game, it's that kind of thing that, and what's so great is because of Cinematographer, and other festivals like LA Asian and CamFest, I've met so many other Filipino filmmakers, and we're in regular conversation with each other. And I just was with Zoraya, who's a great filmmaker, just now. We went and had lunch, and we're talking about her film, and Marie Jamora and Jess Dilla Merced and H.P. Mendoza and PJ Raval. There's we're kind of Ramona Diaz. We're all kind of forming this community, and we all help each other, and it's such a beautiful thing. It's that's going to help all of us, I constantly call them and ask advice, and vice versa. They call me and ask advice.
Yeah,
so it's to form this like film community, which I think is wonderful and great.
Yeah, just like the Filipino food movement, we can always have our Filipino film movement.
That's right.
I think it's starting to happen. I hope Yellow Rose is a small part of that.
And again, I just want to go back to Yellow Rose, and I just think that how awesome and interesting the different intersectionality that's happening in your film. Like, you wrote it 10, 15 years ago, you say, and it just, with all the things happening, it's still relevant or even more relevant.
More relevant, yeah.
And who would have thought, especially with the child separation issues and all this stuff.
Yeah.
That being said, with the immigration question, I just want to say it's great that you're talking about it, and it's not just it's a Filipino American and immigration issue, because I think it gets lost sometimes. Everyone just thinks, oh, immigration is just people coming from Mexico or south of the border.
Right.
It's such a bigger issue, and it's a humanitarian issue, which is, I think, you were going for, and that these are Americans in the end because they came here when they were young.
Well, that's another thing that I want to raise awareness about. The Filipino community in America is the third largest immigrant group, not Asian immigrant, but immigrant group in the country. And we're just nowhere in the media. You just don't see us. And I talk about this a lot. You see Filipinos in the media, but rarely do they play Filipinos.
Exactly.
Other races or, and I really want to change that. I want to change that perception about who we are. That's an important thing for me. And it was really important for me that the parts that are Filipino were really authentic, and there's plastic on the couch. There's the back of the thing. There's just wooden spoons on the wall. We'll see it and we're like, oh yeah, we know it. And so there's a. I know you guys haven't seen the film yet, but we played Dahil Sayo as a big part of the movie. The song Dahil Sayo, and that's such a loaded song for us as Filipinos. And what was interesting is I asked non-Filipino audiences, what did that mean to you? Because Filipino audiences get all teary-eyed. There's one part in the film particularly that, I won't, spoiler alert, but it's packed with emotion. And so there's little things in the film that are my little gifts to Filipinos that I think you can still enjoy the movie, but if you're Filipino, it will mean something a little bit extra. That was important. A little I know, I hear it. That's it.
The head nod,
Yeah, like Princess Princess.
Yeah, with a purse
in the film.
Yellow Rose is getting a lot of attention and press from mainstream media.
Yeah.
And so, can you talk about that and how has that changed how's that changed things for you and for your film, and what's that mean to you?
It's great. I mean, it's going to really help. We're still, we're still entertaining offers for distribution, but we do plan to release the film this year theatrically. I can say that. But it's helped a lot just to have the mainstream media. We were reviewed by the Hollywood Reporter. Thank God, it was a really good review. So that all those little things help. But you kind of need that extra. It's unfortunate, but you need that extra mainstream validation to get a movie like this out there. And it's still challenging. I'll admit that. It's still you still have to do some hustling and convincing, because I think Eva and Leia are amazing stars and we know them, but they're not as mainstream as, other Asian stars like John Cho or Awkwafina or someone like that. So it's a little bit still of a sell, but our goal is to have this film go wide. We want it to be an American independent film up alongside every other film.
I mean, I don't
come out of the festival circuit.
Yeah, and I don't see why it can't get a main theatrical release, or I mean, it'll. I'm sure it'll be picked up by a streaming service. It's getting so much praise.
Yes. Yes, we're working towards that.
How did Ray Cuerto come on board as a producer for Yellow Rose?
Ray was introduced to me by a couple of people. Cuerto, who's this great filmmaker and executive in the Philippines, and Joyce San Pedro introduced me as well. And he's just this sort of, this very successful Filipino guy in the studios. He's at Sony Pictures. Mm-hmm. So I went to the lot. When we got connected, he invited me to the lot, and that was such a cool thing. Just like going on to the Sony lot. He's in this building with Paramount and Columbia, and it just was like, wow, this is really Hollywood. And and I pitched him Yellow Rose. I spent 2 hours. I pitched him the movie, and he's like, I'm in. So
That's awesome.
I mean, I have a lot of passion for the film, and I think people can see that, and that served me well.
And no, Ray's a great guy. He's a friend of FilAm Creative. We've had him on the show in the past, last season. Wonderful man, and it's great that he got involved and he's helping produce these Filipino American stories and films.
Yes, he's so devoted to that as a mission, and he's a guy, as a producer, I can't say enough of what a great producer is. I mean, I call him like at night, and I'm like, our movie sucks. Like, he's like, it's great, hang in there. Like, I was like, why is no one picking it up? And so all that stuff, like all your doubts. He's just such a rock of support, and like the biggest fan of the film.
Speaking of producing,
and that's what you want.
Yeah. So speaking of producing, so I'm pretty sure this is one of the big questions filmmakers like to ask.
Okay.
What are your recommendations for filmmakers?
Gosh, that's such a hard question.
The magic question right there.
Question. Every filmmaker likes to hear successful filmmakers.
Yeah, it's not easy, and there's a reason it took me so long to make this movie. It's not easy. In my case, it was Cinematographer was kind of the catalyst for that, and winning that one grant. Once you get your first money in, it's a little bit easier to raise money as you go along. And then another executive producer came on while we were shooting, because we were running out of money while shooting, if you can believe it, is Karen Elizaga, another Filipino American who came on to the project kind of midway. And so actually, when I look at the roster of people who have actually given money, I think it's almost all Filipino and Filipino Americans, which is, I'm so proud of that. And that's such a cool thing. But, I think making a short, like I said before, is a really good way to prove to people that you know how to make your feature, and they can see what the production value looks like. And you as a director, it helps you as a director kind of hone in what's working and what's not working. So like Whiplash, that great movie that came out a couple years ago, they did an amazing short that became a feature. And even all the way back to Wes Anderson, he did a short called Bottle Rocket that became a feature, and that's how he started his career. So someone saw the short and they said this should be a feature, and that's how it worked. So doing a short is one great way to sort of, and doing shorts in general is a great way to get your feet wet in filmmaking.
And sorry, I just have to ask real quick, and I mean, you work with Spike Lee and all those other celebrities. Like, did that help or come into play, or it was like, no, you're Filipino, you're on your own?
I think, well, certainly Nelson has always been supportive. Yeah, I would say, I think having worked with them, that just raised my pedigree, maybe. Like people like, oh, there's pictures of me with Spike and Chris Rock on the internet, so she must be doing all right,
She must know what she's doing.
Yeah, so in that respect, then there's some legitimacy to it.
And what future projects do you have coming up?
So I am working on a film called The 3 Lives of David Wong. We're in production right now. It was lucky enough to be selected for the Sundance Creative Producing Lab, which is great because we only select 8 projects, and we were one of them. And it's the story of a Chinese restaurant worker who's wrongfully accused of a murder. and he spends 15 years trying to exonerate himself. But I'm telling that film through live action puppetry. So we're shooting puppets in real locations, including Dannemora Prison and New York City and Chinatown and Hong Kong, where I just came back from, where I started shooting. So that's a totally different film. It's very experimental. I'm pushing genre, doing something totally different, because Yellow Rose is a very classic American film. I mean, it's a drama, it's a music film. I didn't stray too far from tropes or anything like that, but this film is way pushed out there. So it's like flexing my creative muscles a little bit and playing with genre and form. And I'm really excited about that. We recently won the CAM Documentary for Social Change Grant, which was a co-funded by the MacArthur Foundation. So nice. We just won that, and then I can't announce it, but I just won another grant. So we're sort of plugging along, and yeah, I've got a bunch of other projects that I'm writing as well.
That's so awesome. You're just killing the game right now.
You just don't sleep. Just like.
I also have a 4-year-old who's with her dad now. Thank you.
Well, share with the audience, how can they follow you or follow your films? Where can they stalk you?
Well, yellowrosefilm.com. And I will say to your viewers, stay tuned. June 13th, we are dropping our trailer on deadline. So keep a lookout for that. It's really important that this film at this stage get tweeted and retweeted, and we want that trailer to go viral. That's going to help us get a wider distribution. That's going to send a message to the Sony Pictures and the Paramounts and the A24s of the world that this is a movie people want to see. Mm-hmm. So, spread the word to all your friends and help us sort of show the demand for this movie. It's really important for a little movie like ours to stand out. Even with all the accolades, it's still a difficult road to get it to where we want it to be.
So right now, you're saying it still hasn't been picked up by a studio for distribution yet, you're saying?
Not yet, no. I will say we have some offers. We haven't not had offers. But
still negotiating.
We're still negotiating. We really want it to have a real special release. So we're still ironing things out. It's going well, though.
Yeah, I wish I had studios.
Yes.
Pick it up.
Any studios out there?
Well, thank you so much for being a guest on our show, and thank you for everything that you're doing and paving the way for future generations. And this is so inspiring. My goodness, I feel so honored that you came on.
Yeah,
enlightened us.
No, not at all. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time.
Salamat.
And yeah, you're more than welcome. Let us know when you come down here. We'll go eat some Filipino food.
Right.
And any excuse to eat some Filipino food, I'm down.
Hell yes. Yeah. Did I say yellowrosefilm.com? Mm-hmm. Did I plug that? Let's plug it again.
Do you have Instagram or anything you want to plug also?
Yeah, it's all at Yellow Rose Film, and then for me, it's like Diane Paragas, and I think for both Instagram and for Twitter and Facebook. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Diane, for joining FilAm Creative Voices. Thank you and congratulations on your film. Awesome work. And again, thank you for doing this video conference with us all the way from New York City, from Brooklyn. And thank you, Diane. I'm Walter Talens, aka Man of Tales on IG.
And I'm Arlyn Dela Pena. You can find me at Arlyn_Dela Pena.
You guys are watching FilAm Creative Voices. Until next time.
Mahalo.